Hey everyone, Guy here with Total Geek Live, and today I'm doing a solo video because as you probably know, the new DuckTales reboot dropped today, and we're already starting to get questions of what'd you think of it? Did you like it? What'd you think? So obviously me being the big DuckTales fan of the group, the other guys gave me their blessing to go ahead and really talk about what's going on with the new DuckTales and what we thought and how we liked it. So a little bit about that. And let's just get started. Let's talk turkey, or in this case, duck. So basically, DuckTales, this new version, is a full-on reboot. This is not a continuation of either the comics or the 1987 animated series. And for those who know me, I'm usually not a big fan of reboots. They usually try to reinvent the wheel and put their own personal spin on it without really grasping what makes the property that they're trying to redo so special. And that's why I think a lot of reboots fail. They just don't get it. This one is done right. I have to full out say I really liked this one. Again, because it didn't try to reinvent the wheel. It pulls heavily from everything Scrooge McDuck, and I was honestly surprised about that. It pulls directly from comic book elements from Uncle Scrooge. It pulls very heavily from the original Disney Afternoon show, and surprisingly, speaking of which, it pulls heavily from Disney Afternoon in general. I was kind of shocked by that. You know, I don't want to do too many spoilers, and I don't know what all this is going to mean. It could be throwaway lines. It could be establishing an incontinuity of this new world, because everything is world building, interconnected, everything these days. But if the names of Spoonerville or St. Canard or Cape Suzette mean anything to you, they dropped those, and I was like, wow, I wonder what that means, if anything, but it's still cool. So the new DuckTales series, like I said, is really pulling from everything, and for me as a fan, that's really awesome because they don't beat you over the head with it. What they do actually show, if you look in the background, there's a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, references from the life and times of Scrooge McDuck, a lot of stuff from the comics. There's a lot of things from the cartoon series itself. I mean, there's a shout out to the pilot episode. I pretty strongly believe that there is a magic lamp from Treasure of the Lost Lamp in there. So they definitely went hardcore on that, and I was super impressed by that. But it's one of those things that's blink or you'll miss it. And from what I've heard, and I won't spoil this, but they look to be pulling from other Duck resources as the series progresses. And like when I read some of that, that was, again, just super cool how in-depth they're going into the Scrooge mythos about that. So let's talk about the new series. I don't want to talk so much about the plot episode because if you want to see the new DuckTales pilot, it's going on 24 hours a day today. It's going on at the time of the filming of this video, and it'll be going on well tonight. So if you really want to see it, I'm sure there's a source you can find it. Also, you can download the Disney XD app, and you can find it there. So if you don't have the channel on cable, you can at least find it somewhere. I'm sure it'll make its way to you pretty soon. But the movie, basically, it starts out, it's a very different dynamic because for those who remember the original DuckTales from the 80s, they changed up a lot of elements from like the Carl Barks stories where Donald and Scrooge and the boys would go off and have these adventures. When DuckTales debut, for whatever reason, perhaps because Donald was such a popular character, they removed Donald from the original series, and they had him join the Navy and leave the triplets off in Scrooge's care. And kind of as a surrogate replacement, they had Launchpad McQuack. In this series, Launchpad is there. Donald's been restored as Scrooge's sidekick partner in adventure. And that, to me, is really, really cool because I think it adds a lot of that dynamic. And that in itself is really interesting because it's almost set in its own way after the comic series, because where they did have all these great adventures and everything's heavily referenced, Scrooge and Donald are very estranged at the start of this. They're not on the best terms with each other, and of course one of the central themes of DuckTales is family, So, of course, things soften and Donald becomes a regular part of the cast again. That said, they also pull heavily from DuckTales because Launchpad's still there. Launchpad is still just, hey, I'm happy to be there, man. He's still happy-go-lucky. He's still easygoing. He's still willing and ready to be part of any of these adventures. And he still crashes airplanes like nobody's business. He's still a terrible pilot gifted with this ability to just survive anything he wrecks. Some of the biggest changes I saw in characterization were Mrs. Beakley, or as she's simply known here as Beakley. I'm not sure of her role because she's definitely not the secretary in this. Originally, she was the nanny in the original DuckTales series, and she's definitely not a secretary in this because she's very quick to let anyone know she is not that. I don't know if she's like an assistant. She could be a bodyguard. They don't really get into her backstory, so I'm kind of curious as to what her deal is because it's clear that she's been working with Scrooge for some time before the events of this. Webby is very different. She's not the naive, innocent, very young little girl like she was in the original series. Her characterization now is what I would imagine she would be if she had a couple years of adventures with Scrooge under her belt, and as a result of those changes would be. She's still very excited. She's obsessed with the Duck family and all their history and adventures. She definitely knows more about Scrooge than the nephews do. And she's gung-ho, but she hasn't had a lot of experience, you know, out in the field. Well, actually, she hasn't had any. So she's still new and fresh. She's just eager to get out there and go have these great adventures that she's heard so much about. The triplets are also different. Huey, Dewey, and Louie are no longer differentiated by just like having a red shirt or a green one or a blue one. You know, in the original series and up to date, they've always been almost the same character because their personality is pretty much the same. They basically finish each other's sentences or speak in unison. Now they're very different. Huey seems just very excited to be a part of this. He's very much a planner. He's still, you know, heavily references the Junior Woodchuck guidebook. Dewey is, I think they're trying to make him kind of the breakout character because he's super active. He's super down for these adventures. You know, he wants to be Scrooge McDuck's sidekick, and he's very vocal about this. Louie's a little bit more laid back. Don't know if he's so much of a slacker, but he's very laid back, very subdued. He's jokingly referred to as the evil triplet. So whatever that means, he might be the most mischievous of the three. We'll find out, I'm sure. And, of course, there's Scrooge McDuck himself, which is voiced by Doctor Who's David Tennant, the 10th Doctor. It was very interesting to hear his voice do it because he sounds very much like David Tennant in the previews, and that's all I could think of. And then it feels more Scrooge actually seeing the whole story play out. Alan Young did Scrooge McDuck from Mickey's Christmas Carol in the early 80s up until actually not too terribly long ago. He did reprise Scrooge for the DuckTales remastered video game, and he even did some of the Mickey Mouse shorts, which if you haven't seen those, definitely check those out. Those are super funny, lots of pop culture references to all things Disney and that's super cool. But I like the new take on Scrooge. I haven't really seen a full establishment of the personality because Scrooge, certainly in comics and certainly in the original series, he lived up to his name in the sense that he was not very charitable. He did look down on people less fortunate than he was. I believe, you know, the nephews and Donald getting his family reestablished in those series helped to soften Scrooge again over the years. But again, you know, Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, he started out young and optimistic, and all his life experiences made him very hard and bitter. And it was up to, again, Donald and the family to help him get back into life again. So I don't know how he's going to be, but the depiction I saw in this opening movie was great. I really liked him, and the Scottish brogue, just perfect Scrooge McDuck. Of course, Flintheart Glumgold is in this as well. You know, they'll have all the established enemies. They'll have Flintheart Glumgold. They'll have Ma Beagle and the Beagle Boys. They'll probably have more established as we go on throughout the series. One of the things that really, there were two things that really stuck out to me. It's funny. The show is very funny. It's very witty. It's very fast-paced. The writing just seemed fun. Everybody involved seemed like they were just having a great time with this, and I thought that was super cool. I laughed a lot more than I expected. I expected, like, oh, this will be fun. I'm going to have a great time with this. But I actually laughed. They had some genuinely good humor in this. The other thing that really impressed me is the art style. And I know a lot of people are still kind of, I don't know. It's like it's so different from the original. They do tiny little nods to the original series, but it is very much its own thing, and it seems more heavily referenced to the comic style. A lot of, Donald is wearing an all-black uniform, like that was the way it was in the comics, and Scrooge's outfit was red and black as opposed to the blue and red like it was in DuckTales, the cartoon. So they're definitely harking back, and there's even like certain areas of like walls and scenery and things where it has kind of like a pointillism style like the old four-color comics. Again, they're heavily referencing back to that, and the new art style actually really grows on me. And I think it's going to be something I'm really going to enjoy. It's slightly different, but that's not a bad thing. And I'm just really curious as to see what they're planning to do with that. I think the only downside I had with it is just I feel like I've seen a lot of this episode already. They've done a lot of trailers building up to this. They did a Comic-Con segment. They did a lot of trailers, meet the new version of all these characters. And they have showed a lot. I feel like I saw 30% of this episode, and that might be too high of a number. But in many cases, it was like, oh, okay, I've seen this whole segment, and it goes on, and it fits well within continuity. And I certainly I didn't mind it in that context, but I do feel like I've seen a lot of it. The ending I won't spoil. Of course, they do a really surprising what could be that one stinger at the very end. And again, for Duck fans, this is, if you follow the Donald Duck, Uncle Scrooge comics, was actually a surprisingly big reveal. That's like the first time they've ever ventured into this territory. So I'll be curious to see what they'll do. It will probably be more of an overarching story, as opposed to where the standard original DuckTales episodes were more of a one-off. You didn't really have a continuity. It was just kind of like a one-off, and nothing was ever really referenced again unless they kind of did a pseudo-sequel to it or something. But yeah, this looks like it's going to have an overall story. So again, with the plot element they dropped at the end, I'm curious to see where they'll take it. And then I mentioned, and I don't want to like spoil it, and even though I've talked about it when we were discussing everything Comic-Con, it's already out there, so I'm not like getting it out there, I guess, but they're talking about a pretty surprising cameo guest appearance that's going to happen sometime within the course of the series. And again, the way they name drop some things throughout this episode, I'm like, okay, are they going to establish their new in-universe? Is this going to be like another thing like the Marvel Cinematic Universe where everything's interconnected? Because that cameo is going to be cool. I'm definitely wanting to see their interpretation of it. But that's basically everything about DuckTales. Did I like it? Absolutely. I expected I would, unless they just royally screwed it up. And I expected that they'd have to work really hard to mess this one up. But they did a great job. I had a lot of fun with it, and if you like the old show, or if you read any of the comics, or even if you just kind of want a fun adventure show that's pretty witty and has some clever ideas about, the Indiana Jones of the Duck world, it's definitely worth your time, definitely worth a watch. And as I said, Disney XD is running it all day at the time of the video, and that's today. So you get a chance to see it, it'll be out there for a couple more hours, and I'm sure it'll manifest in all other sorts of places. But definitely do yourself a favor. Take time out today and go check it out. And yeah, it was just great. I had a lot of fun with this, so I definitely recommend it. Well, that's everything for DuckTales. So thanks so much for stopping by and hearing what I thought. And as always, well, it's all geek to me.